Welcome to the December 11th meeting of the California State 911 Advisory Board. First order of business is roll call. Chief Scott Howland.
Present.
Brenda Bruner.
Present.
Chief John Peters.
Present.
Chief Craig Carter.
Present.
Sheriff Corey Honey. Sheriff, Ingrid Braun.
Here.
Chris Herron.
Here.
Edward Hatfield. Hanan Harb Patterson. Leanne Magoski.
Here.
Okay, first order of business is approval of the minutes. Unfortunately, there was an error, so the minutes from the March 7th and June 7th meeting were already approved. We will take the minutes for the August and November meetings at your next board meeting. Moving on to closed session, we will now go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 1112E. Okay, we'll call the, I'm sorry? Right. Call the meeting back to order. We have nothing to report out from the closed session. Next item on the agenda is a legislative update. Unfortunately, our legislative representative is not in attendance, so we will jump past that item. Next item is FirstNet update. So, you know, our broadband services division is continuing to work with our local agencies to identify some coverage gaps, and they're feeding that information to AT&T. So far, we've collected data from over 20 counties, and that, as I said, that information has been passed to AT&T. We have submitted a request to FirstNet. There is a funding system, funding source called SLIGP, which is the state local implementation grant program, and we can do some planning efforts. The identification of coverage concerns is within that that realm, and so we have requested authority to move forward with some additional planning in that. Please let the record reflect that Mr. Hatfield has joined us. Thank you, sir. Have also been working on the California Statewide Communications Interoperability Plan, which has been, a draft of which has been posted, and one of the elements of that is a goal to develop rules on the operation of FirstNet services and broadband services, and how those work from an interoperability standpoint. On October 22nd, the State Department of Technology did execute an agreement with AT&T for FirstNet services. That is open to all public safety agencies that are government funded, both state and local. Non-public safety agencies that are state and local can apply for that, and they will be vetted through Cal OES. And but this service is not available to non-governmental entities under the CalNet contract. There is other alternatives. They can go directly to AT&T if they so choose, and obtain services that way. A couple of issues that did arise regarding the service. One was in the Fleet Week exercise out in the San Francisco area, where the users tested priority and preemption on the FirstNet network. Their user experience was not what was expected, and there has been a request submitted to FirstNet for support on that. Additionally, a potential security issue has been identified in one of the FirstNet applications, specifically an enhanced push-to-talk. Motorola Kodiak is a security risk in the software that's used in their EPPT. And the software is listed by FirstNet as approved and vetted in its application. And again, we're working with FirstNet to get some resolution on that. And moving forward, you know, the Broadband Services Division will continue its activity to facilitate the information exchange from our local agencies with FirstNet and AT&T. And they will be attending and coordinating regional planning areas throughout the state. The one thing that they are also working on, recognizing that, in the interim, there are, with the coverage concerns that some of our agencies have, the California Department of Technology is working with Cal OES to look at a broadband services contract for other providers other than AT&T. And we've had some initial meetings with the vendors on that, and those proposals are due the end of sometime in January, following which there will be some consideration of those proposals. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions of the board? Any questions of the public? Okay, we'll move on to the California 911 branch report.
All right, thank you. Good morning. You have the slides in your slide deck, and as I go through these, if you have questions, please just interrupt, ask for clarification. Trying to hit the high points on what has changed since the last time that we met. These are the 6 items we'll be going over in some amount of detail. So I'll begin with our fiscal and operational reviews. This year in 2018, we've completed 105, and this is a record year for us as we've outpaced all other years that we've recorded in the 911 branch, and we still have a few more that we will yet complete before the end of the year. These are important because they give us the opportunity to go out and meet with the PSAPs and work with them, make sure that they're in compliance with the operations manual, and then answer any questions they have related to CPE equipment and the 911 network that's delivering the 911 calls to their particular PSAP. And so we have 4 folks in the office that on a continual basis are out there meeting with these PSAPs. The goal is to make sure that we visit each PSAP at least once every 4 years and more if needed. And so if there's one of the PSAPs that you represent or your association is affiliated with that you want us to visit in the near future, please let us know, and we'll give them top of list priority for that. And we've been scheduling at least 30 per quarter, and you can see by the numbers we're going to beat that number for the year. So any questions on the fiscal and operational review process or where we're at? All right. So the other stat we're tracking is the number of CPE or customer premise equipment, this is the call answering equipment in the PSAP that we've installed year to date. We're about 6 months into this current fiscal year, so at the halfway mark, we're on pace to have almost 80 systems installed this year. And again, you can see from previous years, this is going to be a big year for us. And included in that number are some very large PSAPs that we're working with that we hope to have done by the end of the year. LAPD, LA County Sheriff, a couple of those that are in the works this year. And that's important from a fiscal perspective as well. Obviously, those larger CPE installs have a bigger hit on our budget. So this is where we're at for the year. Any questions on CPE install?
But quick question, and this kind of aligns with your previous item of the fiscal and operational reviews. I know when we look at reliability of the network, that aging equipment is always a big risk. Are you finding folks our PSAPs are being proactive in planning and getting things lined up so that we get on a regular cycle to keep our equipment refreshed, or are we struggling with some folks actually engaging to do those replacements?
There are a couple of installations out there, most notably some of the military installations where the DoD rules interpreted for one particular DoD agency are different than another. Some think that it's okay for the state to assist with CPE replacement. And if you think about, those folks are in California, the 911 calls, and so we don't have a problem with funding them, but some agencies, there were a couple of military departments that would not accept our funding, and so they've gotten behind in their CPE replacement. They're also in the process of figuring out what they're going to do with Next Gen 911 from a DoD perspective. And so we've been meeting with the coordinator of all federal PSAPs. They can't even tell us how many PSAPs there are in California from a federal perspective. They don't even know that number. So that's one category of these where there's some older equipment out there. For those that are state funded, we stop paying maintenance after year 7, and then after that, it's on the PSAP to fund the maintenance. That's proven to be a really good incentive for them to reach back to the state and replace equipment. And then through this fiscal and operational review process, for those instances where we're seeing a lot of failures, we're moving them up and saying, look, it's time to replace your equipment. You know, the reason for these failures is, you know, that your equipment is too old and needs to be replaced. And we've been meeting with a couple of agencies recently who are in that category, and multiple meetings and getting them to be a little more proactive and in a more aggressive timeline to deploy their CPE, and we've had great success there. So that's really how all this fits together. We have yet to really come against somebody who's just being outright obstinate and is unwilling to replace their equipment. Sometimes it's just a matter of they don't even know we exist because the PSAP manager was there 6 years ago when they bought the equipment. That manager's gone. A new one has come in, and until we engage with them through the fiscal and operational review process, they don't even know the help that we provide to them. And so we've had great success there too. Yeah. Okay, other questions? All right, text to 911 deployment. This chart is probably a little hard to read on the screens. You do have a hard copy in front of you that's pretty legible. If you're like me and put on your readers, you can probably discern it. I'll point out a couple of things on this chart. So if you see, I'll point over here like I guess I can't point on that screen, a plus sign in here. That's where the changes are since the last time we met. Anywhere you see a plus up, that's what's changed since the last time that we briefed this slide out to the advisory board. So what we're seeing is, to date, 283 of the 437 PSAPs in this state have either partially or fully deployed. So what that means is they're either started in the process or they're already through the process and are actually receiving text. However, there's another step in the process where once all of the PSAPs in a county are ready to accept text, then they'll do a public announcement. And so that's kind of another process. So some of these include what we call the soft starts, where they haven't actually done their public announcement yet. All right? And so typically when you see the county counts match 100% in the county, that's when we expect and begin to work with that county for the public announcement. So the next slide has some details on some counties that are going to be having announcements coming up or who have recently announced. So any questions on this graphic before we move on?
I have a question. So I know earlier in the year there was a push for a proposal of what your plan would be as an agency to deploy by December 2018. Has there been any increase in agencies responding with a plan before the end of the year? Is this predicated on that, or what do you have moving forward?
Yes, we have seen an increase. There are still a few PSAPs out there that we have not heard from as far as what their deployment plan is for text to 911. We've run into a couple of challenges on the next slide that I'll point out, which is one of the reasons why we haven't been pushing as hard. We obviously don't want to push the deployment of a technology that may have some issues or limitations, and I'm going to talk about one of those on the next slide. But the short answer is, Brenda, yes, we have seen an increase in those that are willing. And really what we're seeing is the barriers are being removed where people are no longer concerned about text and the impact to their PSAP. That's the big thing we're seeing. People are understanding that this is not going to have a huge detrimental impact to the operational flow in the PSAP. And that's one of the biggest concerns, and that concern is essentially gone away.
Budge, I just want to make a comment. I know, we're showing 64% of PSAPs, but I think it's a good point to make, which we have some really large population centers that have gone live with text. And I don't know if you have that readily available to you, but that might be something interesting to note, because I think with, you know, with your LA, Orange County, a lot of Riverside, San Bernardino, SAC, some of the Bay Area counties, it's a really large percentage of the population that does have text to 911 available in California, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can add to this graphic a percent of the population, an estimate of the percent of the population covered, because that's a good point. Yep. Because it's much higher than 64% of the population. All right, so on the next slide, one of the big announcements that was made, Sacramento County is now taking text to 911. They've had their public announcement, and Orange County, another, to your point, Chris, another very large county, is working on a public notice event for theirs as well. We don't have a date for that yet, but Orange County will be coming soon. So these are some of the larger counties that are moving forward with text, and we have others that are in the pipeline. This last bullet is a little technical and perhaps a little, it'll sound a little confusing, but I'll walk you through it. Originally, we had a non-competitive bid that we used to start this whole text process. One vendor was doing a web solution for text. The other vendor did an integrated solution. And because of the contract vehicle and the way it was written, if you picked integrated, you had to go with vendor A, and if you picked web, you had to go with vendor B. And originally, they could not transfer one to another. So that was the reason for countywide deployment and coordination, to make sure everybody used the same vendor for text on a countywide basis, to eliminate that inability to transfer. They since solved that problem of the ability to transfer, and we were really excited. And then we deployed text to 911 at a couple of secondary PSAPs, and that's when the problem was discovered. So primary PSAP, CHP, PD, sheriff, if you're on one TCC and you try and transfer to a secondary PSAP, your fire and EMS PSAPs essentially, that's on another TCC, in other words, from one vendor to another, you can't make that transfer today. They're working on a solution, and we've taken a look at who has deployed in California and who this impacts. But just know that if you're a secondary PSAP and you're trying to get a text from someone who's chosen a different TCC, a text control center, or a different vendor, they would be unable to transfer to you. So this mainly affects, you may know the difference to know whether they're web or integrated, because if they're integrated, they're on one solution, and if they're web, they're on the other. And again, we've reached out directly to the PSAPs that are impacted by this problem to let them know that it exists, and we're working with the providers to fix it. But we want to bring it up to the advisory board just so that it's on your awareness. We've also sent a notification out to every PSAP as well to let them know that this problem exists. So any questions on that?
Budge, a couple questions. Do we know how many areas it actually impacts? Because I know some counties, most people coordinated and ended up with the same TCC, so it literally wouldn't be an issue in that area, and then obviously others are mixed. Do we know?
Yes, we do. I know that the largest concentration where this is affecting someone today would be Butte County. Butte County has an integrated solution. So if you're using an over-the-top solution there and you're trying to transfer a text to a Butte County fire agency, secondary PSAP, this would be a problem. So obviously, Chief Howland, from your perspective, this could impact you in that area.
Right, yeah. And I guess my other question related is, have the vendors given us a time frame as far as how long it'll take to resolve the issue?
They've given us rough estimates of dates, but we don't have any hard dates. It's going to take a few months to get this corrected. Okay. The main problem is that the way text transfers are done, you associate a shape file, where in the legacy world, it's just transferred to a phone number. I mean, it's the way it's been for a long time. In the text world, it's a shape file. In other words, it's a geo-encoded shape. And when you have two of them sitting one on top of each other for the same physical area, the text solution can't distinguish between the two, which is the case for every secondary. Secondaries have a overlapping boundary with a primary PSAP, and that's the problem. And they're trying to work through that right now.
So just to add on a little bit, we talked about this quite a bit at the LRPC meeting yesterday. So I think a few things that the LRPC asked for, and one that Budge reassured us that they had done, which was to reach out directly. So not just that email that all PSAPs got, but reach out directly to those that they know are impacted, the Butte County situation. And then as PSAPs are thinking about going integrated, which is happening out there where they've started with over the top but are now going to integrate text because they're going to upgrade their CPE, make sure that the state is reminding them that they need to engage their neighbors. Because really what the bottom line here is that there is an operational impact. So if you're a PSAP where this is going to impact you, you need to be working with your neighbors so that you're all on the same page with deciding what are we going to do. When CHP in the Chico area, gets a 911 call that needs to go to CAL FIRE, they need to talk sooner rather than later, right, to determine, hey, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to transfer it to the sheriff, who's then going to transfer it over? So anyway, I think we talked about this quite a bit, and it sounds like, the state was definitely receptive to the feedback we had. But we'd also love to hear about the solution once that's in place. At least the problem's been identified, and so it sounds like there's some ideas about a potential solution. It's just a matter of implementing it and then testing it.
Budge, when we look at folks, and I realize we have folks in many different segments as far as where they are in the transition to text to 911, what is the biggest holdback for PSAPs that haven't started that implementation process? And the reason I ask is I recently had an interesting conversation with a member of the hearing impaired community who was excited that we had implemented text to 911, and you can understand how that's a game changer for them to be able to reach out, communicate using a cell phone with that. And so as we look at where we are across the state, where we have it available in some areas and not other areas, how do we get to the point where we have text to 911 everywhere so those folks that can't use a phone, like most of us, have that option?
So one of the biggest barriers we're seeing now is those PSAPs that are desiring an integrated solution. That solution requires us to work with the CPE vendor to actually integrate that text into that software, and there's a timeline associated with that. There was a financial piece identified with it, and we worked through that by working with the vendors to establish what is reasonable for that upgrade. So that takes longer, and I know, Leanne, if you want to chime in on your experience, it does take quite a bit longer for that integrated solution, and we understand the need for it. Web-based is a much faster deployment process, but has different implications into the PSAP for web versus integrated. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that this integrated solution takes more time and is not as fully developed as the web. And so you're seeing PSAPs that are waiting until this integrated is a much more seamless process.
So we've been in Marin County we're going forward with integrated. And I think one of the things that from the 911 community, the over-the-top solution, it only allows you to have it at 2 workstations, even though you can log in anywhere, only 2 workstations. And there's this fear that you're going to miss the call. So leading kind of the charge on integrated and having it, be seamless. Your 911 call's ringing, oh, look, you're getting a text. Thought this was going to be this easy process. It is not easy. We've kind of been there's truly integrating it is a challenge. And so while it says Marin County is in partial deployment, I have a router sitting in my office, and we're still trying to work. And it's not a lack of anybody not trying, but it just takes longer because it's not, we'll just log in and it's the same everywhere. I do think in the long run, some of us have to go through this pain because we have to be able to figure out if it's going to work well integrated. And we're seeing lots more agencies now upgrade their system and be text ready. So I'm hoping in the next 4 to 6 months we'll be live, but I was hoping to be live, by fall, and here I'm going to be lucky to be live by summer. So, and we have a secondary PSAP attached, and so this news yesterday at the LRPC was interesting. So, we'll be testing that as well.
And later on in the contract update, we know the long-term solution to this is to get a contract out there that's updated, and we're working on that. That's really the long-term, to make sure that we've got a vendor on board that can address these challenges that we know exist. And so that's really where we're headed, but procurement is a process, and we've started down that road as well to address that. Our current non-competitive bid contract ends in May, it's either April or May of 2020, and that seems like a long ways away, but we need time to transition all these 200 and some PSAPs over from the current contract to this new one. So we're starting that now, and that we're going to use that to address some of these shortfalls. Yeah. All right, so hearing no more on text to 911, most of the content of this portion of the deck we've briefed out before on Next Gen 911. The biggest change on this slide is I moved the funding and procurement pieces as far away from the rest of the icon as I could because of what happened last year. So we are aggressively working on shoring up the funding model, and the procurement will follow shortly after. We're ready to release that RFP today. We just need the funding in place, and I'm going to talk through that a little bit. So this slide is essentially the same one I briefed out at our special session that we had in October, where we've got to meet our statutory requirements. So we've got to design and implement NextGen, and we've also got to maximize the efficiency of the current 911 system while sustaining the existing 911 program in a revenue shortfall. And that's what we're doing. And so we briefed out in that October meeting how we intend to meet that goal. We've been tracking our revenue as well as our expenditures to make sure that we're on track for the end of the year, and we've had to suspend a lot of activities as a result of not having the funding needed to execute on NextGen 911. So the corrective action is obviously legislation to update the funding model. If you're interested in reviewing, again, the language that's out there, you can go out right now and look at Assembly Bill 1836 and Senate Bill 870, and that is the baseline of the language that we're going to use moving forward. There are a couple of tweaks that may have to happen. One of them is this next bullet. There was a recent court decision that impacted mobile prepaid wireless. Some of the details on it are still in the courts and haven't been fully vetted and made public, but we think that the end result will be that the portion of the revenue and tax code that's dedicated to mobile prepaid will probably go away, meaning that the SETNA language can't rely on that piece of tax and revenue code as a collection mechanism. We have to incorporate all of that into what we're going to put into the revenue and tax code associated with 911, and we're working on that. We know that has a lot of trigger points to it. It's going to be interesting how we work through that. And then we'll get this updated revenue model through the for legislative action in early 2019. If I had a crystal ball, I would tell you when. I don't. So as soon as we can, we want to get this through as urgency legislation. And one of the events that we're doing to highlight the awareness of this and to get everybody on the same page is we're still working to plan this 911 Goes to Sacramento event. We're looking at late March, early April. We think the timing of that would be good versus when this potentially could actually be voted on in both the Assembly and the Senate. And so more word to follow once we've locked in an actual event. Right now what we're looking for is actually an event location. That's what's stopping us from actually pinning down a date on that. So any questions on the legislative update here on where the SETNA legislation is?
But do we have legislators willing to sponsor new bills?
So that's an interesting question. It will depend on, do you want to answer that? Oh, okay. So it's going to depend on the path that it takes. If it goes through as part of the governor's budget, then it would go through that part. If it's going to be submitted as independent legislation, it would need a sponsor. And so I don't have the answer to that as to the path it's going to take. All right. But once we know, we'll definitely be reaching back out to you with an update on what the bill number is and where it's at. All right. So this slide is an update on our contracts. As I said, the prime RFP is on hold until the set and revenue is stabilized. We are working on a Text 91 RFP. The current, as I said, the current contract expires in March, and it'll be to replace that contract. We hope to have something out soon. I can't release key action dates until we actually get the procurement on the street, but it should be soon. These next two bullets, I actually have individual slides on. So we're working on the process to take our existing location database and convert it into a format that's needed to support NextGen 911. That's one of the projects we're working on. And then 911 location accuracy and validation. You've probably heard a lot in the news, if you've been tracking this, on the ability of device-based location information. Rapid SOS has been in the news a lot about it as an aggregator source for that data. We're working on a way to leverage that information, and I'll cover some details on that. So the first one is the statewide GIS database. There's a lot of information on this slide. We've been working to deconflict the PSAP boundaries. That's what this project has to do. Essentially what this means is every single PSAP needs a boundary that doesn't overlap with your neighbor, that you agree upon, as this is the line of where my jurisdiction ends and yours starts. So you can imagine there's going to be a lot of conversations around that of, is it on the center of the road? Is it on this curb? Is it on that side of the road? We have to work through all of that and deconflict it in order to properly route 911 calls. Keep in mind, this is just to route the call. Your CAD boundaries and how you actually dispatch, that's probably, you know, of utmost importance to the PSAP. We're focused on an agreeable routing mechanism for statewide 911 calls. That's what our focus is on. We have to convert the MSAG and the Annie and Allie information into this geo-encoded data set. So, you know, the way I've used this, if any of you have used, have used Microsoft Excel and a VLOOKUP table where you just look up this value, that's what we have today. Essentially like a really, you know, big VLOOKUP table. We need to go to like a Google Map environment where everything is encoded based on geo-encoded files so that when the location comes in, we can compare to this geo data set and route to the right 911 center. What that means is we have to take all that data and run it through some software. And once you run it through, there's going to be some what I call simple errors. Whether you abbreviated street as ST or spelled out street or didn't even put a name on there for street, or those are kind of simple stuff you can just work through and correct. There's also going to be some more complex errors where a street address doesn't even exist or it plots outside your jurisdiction. Well, we're going to need local expertise in order to correct that error. So we're going to provide an interface for county coordinators or local GIS agencies to make those corrections, provide a standard data format to make those corrections in, and come up with a reimbursement process or direct billing method to recover either the time or the cost to have some outside source come in and help you with that. That's in a nutshell what this project is, and it's going to take 18 months probably to complete, and we hope to have an RFP, we hope to have a contract signed in the beginning of the year. That's kind of where this one is at. So any questions on this?
Yes, I had one question. So when you have like a county that is unincorporated but borders with the city, are you looking at the city, or how are you going to define the unincorporated part with the actual city jurisdiction to create a boundary for the PSAP?
So the boundary for the PSAP would be aligned with working with the county coordinator and the PSAP manager of where their jurisdiction actually ends, so we can come up with that agreement, whether it's incorporated or not, you know, and then say, okay, the city is this, and the county is going to take this piece. And we have to sit down with both entities. That's going to require that, because we at the state need to be the final arbitrator of that, but we can't make that decision in a vacuum. So that's going to require conversations with both those entities along those borders to make sure that we've done it right. And it'll be an iterative process. I'm sure there's going to be times where once we develop the original data set and we implement, there's going to be some feedback that says, this line should really go here. Okay. So then we make an adjustment. But that's how on a big scale, that's how we intend to handle that.
Thank you.
Okay. And we actually had quite a bit of discussion on that at the LRPC yesterday. And the LRPC will give you an update on some of the governance structure that we're going to put in place for that. At least I think they are, right? But that's a source of a lot of conversation, absolutely. All right, so the next big project is this location accuracy and network validation piece. So the idea is to be able to compare what the device is generating for location versus what is coming through the 911 system for location. And being able to reconcile the two and being able to validate that the location-based information is what we need to actually route the 911 call. Is that even capable? Is the timing there? Is the data there? Is the accuracy there? And then comparing that with what's coming through the 911 system for that same call. So that's really what this project is focused on. It is going to require some equipment to be installed at the PSAP. We understand that. It's the only way to gather the data. And we do anticipate being able to provide the capability to all PSAPs to be able to see that supplemental location information. And the idea there would be, we'll make it available. If you want to use it, you can use it. If you don't. But we need it from a statewide perspective in order to do some of the analytics we need to do in order to prepare for next gen. All right, so any questions on the location accuracy? All right. So I think that's it for me, unless there's any
Thank you.
questions from the...
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, there's a question over here. Yes, sir.
But just real quick, and this is a little bit close to home. We discovered in San Diego County that our county PSAP sheriffs didn't have addresses for probably most of the 18 reservations within the county.
Okay.
And that was not the county's fault. That was because the reservations themselves had not provided the information for a number of different reasons, up to and including sovereignty. I know that you had mentioned just previously that you talked about entering into agreements for the GIS and stuff like that. Have you guys given thought to the 152 federally recognized tribes in the state and how entering into that agreement is going to impact their sovereignty?
So we have not had much discussion around that, but we definitely need to add that to our agenda. We have begun to engage with the federal PSAPs because it's a very similar question, not a sovereignty issue, but addresses and detailed GIS of the base is something that they're, reluctant to give up, but is needed if you're going to properly, track a 911 call. So I'll add that to the list to engage with both of those.
I think that that's a wise move to get ahead of, because I'll just use San Diego County as an example. With the 18 reservations, all of us in that county have interoperability amongst our fire agencies. And I'll say all of us utilize AVL as it is right now, and we've entered into agreements with our local communication and CAD centers. But as the state of California coming in and wanting to get addressing and stuff like that, I could potentially foresee some issues, and I think knowing how that takes time, it would probably be something to get on the leading edge of.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right.
I had a question, Budge, or maybe even more of a statement. As we move forward to try to fix the SETNA funding model, one of the things that we may want to consider is regionalizing or consolidation of PSAPs, in particular smaller PSAPs that may be able to consolidate with one another, so there isn't that overlap, but that the funding sources and their CPE funding could be utilized in part of that consolidation, or if there's any additional funding that can come out of the SETNA's program to help facilitate these smaller PSAPs to regionalize into medium-sized centers that can cover a larger area. So that might be something for us to consider.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And right now, we do have a resource at the state for those that desire to consolidate. We have data and information. We can help walk you through the process. The LRPC published a great document on pros and cons of consolidation, some considerations. I think the next piece is probably this funding source. And so that's something we'll take a look at, and we'll take back and see if we can support, from a funding perspective, anyone who self-selects to consolidate, if there's a way for us to provide some funding to help facilitate that.
Any other questions from the board?
I know I'm up next anyway, but just a comment on that. So regionalization, consolidation, that is definitely a topic that's been before the LRPC a couple of times. So most recently, within the last year or two, that document did get created. Really where we ended up was trying to find a way to encourage PSAPs as they were upgrading their CPE to consider one or both. But focusing more on regionalization from a technology perspective is one of the things we identified is although we all in the PSAP community receive our state funding for our telephone CPE, it's really, that is just a small percentage of the overall operating costs of a PSAP. And so even if the state wanted to take the stance of, we're not gonna, fund unless you consolidate or regionalize, there's so many other costs associated with that we felt like we couldn't take that step, if that makes sense. But trying to make sure that the state had the resources to say, hey, you should consider checking in with your neighbors, and maybe you guys can at least get the same type of CPE so that you can answer each other's calls. That's really where we ended up on that.
If I can, from a rural standpoint, if there was a way to incentivize regionalization, that would certainly, we're very strapped for money, Inyo County, but we are looking at consolidating.
Okay.
And if there were, the reason that we're not doing it is the funding aspect of building a new facility and how that would work. So if the state had the means to incentivize us, that would push us a lot further in that direction. We have buy-in, but we don't have cash to buy in.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Okay, we're going to step back to agenda item number 4 for legislative update before we move on with the LRPC. So, Mr. Salvador?
Good morning, everybody. Just want to touch base upon 3 specific bills that were signed by the governor this year that had to deal with emergency alert notifications. So outside of the discussion on the Senate bill, SB 833 by Senator Mike McGuire was passed for Cal OES to develop statewide alert and warning guidelines that could be adopted by local alerting authorities. That actually was also being done through a simultaneous process that resulted outside of the October 2017 wildfires to help craft this, like I said, statewide guidelines. Additionally, another bill that was signed was SB 821 by Hannah Beth Jackson that would have local jurisdictions work with their service utilities to develop an opt-out standard, if you will, because currently the standard for alert and warnings is that you would have to opt in, so you wouldn't be able to get the alerts on your cell phones unless you opted into a program or even a landline. So this has the local jurisdictions working with their service utilities to develop a roster that would enable automatically opt-in residents, and they would have to opt out of receiving emergency notifications. Lastly, AB 1877 by Monique Limon, ironically, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson and Assemblymember Monique Limon represent the same Santa Barbara area that was impacted by the Thomas Fire and subsequent mudslides. That would actually also develop a set of templates, if you will, for translated alert notifications that could be used for emergency notification purposes by local jurisdictions. So those 3 are noteworthy. as well as in terms of following up any discussion related to the SETNA legislation and the refusal to pass that bill. We are working with the incoming administration on language as well as the legislative leadership in terms of rolling it out appropriately. Additionally, questions in relation to additional sponsors or whoever else would want to carry it, that is also being discussed by different groups, such as the CSAC, in terms of having them also having somebody carry a bill as well. But again, that's all part and parcel of what's going to be happening going into the legislative session to start in January. So if there's any other questions.
Any questions from the board?
I have one question. I know that our EOC will be very happy to hear about this templates for translation. Is there more information about that you can?
Sure, I'll be sure to provide you both with the bill language as well as the analysis for
Thank
that.
you.
And I'll have Budge and Pat forward that to you,
Thank you.
or to the board, actually.
Any other questions of the board? Any questions from the public? Thank you, Mr. Salvador.
Sure. Actually, one more quick note that I would like to add, that coming into this upcoming legislative session, the timing of everything, both relative to the SETNA fund, the other issues that Budge had spoken of in relation to the mobile prepaid, and the court case, knowing that that also would have sunsetted coming in 2020, coupled with the impact of the VoIP deregulation also sunsetting at 2020, all comes within this almost perfect storm, if you will, that we would all probably want to be cognizant of and engaged with going forward because of the tertiary impacts that all of these things are going to have to public safety in relation to the nexus of telecommunications.
Thank you. And that, in relation to that, the thing on the VoIP, the one issue that we do need to look at is ensuring appropriate location information. Because you could have a 911 call from a VoIP here, and it will show the front of the building, but it won't show you where in the building that is. So that's something we probably should discuss. Okay, any other questions of the board? From the public? Okay, thank you again. And now we move back to our Long-Range Planning Committee report. Mr. Herron.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we'll cover the things that sort of Budge covered already, just to make sure everyone's aware. We have been having these discussions at the LRPC meeting. Certainly the text to 911 that we talked about, and then SETNA being another big one. And so I'll just reiterate, sort of what we've heard here with that. Failure is not an option, right, next year. I think we all thought that there was no way that that was going to fail earlier this year, and it did. Although we were all engaged, I think all of our organizations had letters of support on file, but I think we need to make sure that not only do we do that, but maybe even more. So that 911 goes to Sacramento sounds like a great event and opportunity that Budge has promised to keep us updated on once a date is set, but we need to make sure that each of our organizations participates in that event when it takes place. So a couple other things that the LRPC is working on. We touched a little bit on this in October, but just to give you an update. So as you'll recall, we've created 4 regional next-gen 911 working groups, those 4 regions being LA, Southern, Northern, and Central. So that's PSAP representatives participating in those working groups with State 911 branch staff. They did have fall 2018 meetings, so meetings in between our last 2. We received updates from each of those groups at our meeting yesterday. Interestingly enough, GIS was a hot topic, and so the timing is great. We reviewed a charter yesterday to create a GIS task force, because while the state and the LRPC feel like those working groups are great, we really have PSAP operation folks in those groups, but there's a need for some technical expertise, and that's what this GIS task force is meant to provide. So this is a task force that is going to also work under, if you will, the LRPC and report back to the LRPC, as well as there's potential for them to be doing some crosswork with those regional next-gen working groups. So as it stands right now, we gave the state some feedback on the charter. We've also identified an LRPC member. It's Alicia Fuller. Is she here today? Oh, there you are. So Alicia is going to be our liaison from the LRPC to that GIS task force. And so I appreciate and thank her for being willing to do that. There is still time to submit names. So anyone on the board here, if you want to check with your agencies or those in the audience and that are watching at home, we still need a few more technical GIS folks. These do not necessarily have to be in your PSAP. It could be your city or county GIS folks, but we want to make sure we have probably in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 people on that task force to really work with the state branch in as we move forward with Next Gen 911, assuming that funding comes into place next spring. So with that, in fact, so the idea there is to finalize the makeup of that group by the first part of the year and have the first meeting of that GIS task force prior to our meetings in February. So we'll have an update for this group at our February meetings. That's it.
Any questions of Mr. Herron? Any questions from the public? Okay, our next item on the agenda is agenda for future meetings. We do have 4 proposed dates up on the screen for you: February 20th, May 15th, August 21st, and November 20th. Our next meeting will be on February the 20th. Does the board require or request any additional items be added to the agenda? Hearing none. Now we'll open the floor for public comment. Hearing none. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a second? Any objection? We're adjourned.